So Coase theorem and broader view, the free market environmentalism is a way to get around the information problem. Right? It's we're reframing or the motivation is this, right? That the person doing the polluting knows their motivation the best, right? Why are they polluting? What's their benefit? What are they getting out of it? And the person who is being polluted upon knows the harm the most, right? How much is this? How much do I value this environmental damage? How much environmental damage am I willing to accept? Right? So the motivation behind Coase theorem then says, well, let the people who actually have an interest in this issue negotiate. Let them bargain. Right? And the government's role, right, is just to allocate the right. So we reframing the problem, instead of looking at it as a pollution problem, we're looking at it as the right to pollute versus the right to be free from pollution. And the government's role then is just to allocate the right, right, between the two, between the party of interest. Now, the theorem itself, right? So the Coase theorem itself, right, is really important because how does the government know who to give the rights to? Right? Now, what Coase theorem says that it doesn't matter, right? As long as you let the bargaining, and then now there are certain conditions that have to be met, which we'll talk about in a minute, but as long as you let the two parties bargain, right, then the socially efficient outcome, that optimal outcome, that 50 acres being harvested, right, that will happen regardless of the initial allocation of property rights. Right? Basically, if the private parties can bargain without cost, right, over the allocation of the resource, then they can solve the problem of externality on their own. Okay. So now it's important, right, to emphasize that the allocation of property rights still matters because that is a fairness question, right? So because these property rights now will have value, right? And so whoever you give the rights to, that party will benefit. That's for sure. But the outcome, right, and which is from a societal perspective, right? Because we're not being biased towards any particular group of people. From the societal perspective, right, it doesn't matter how you allocate it; the optimal outcome will result regardless, right? So that's important. Okay? But allocation is so important. All right, so we'll talk about different cases in just a moment. But these are the conditions necessary for Coase theorem. All right, first, property rights have to be clearly defined. Right? When people negotiate, they have to know what exactly are they negotiating. Right? 1 acre of land, and where is this land exactly, and for how long, and etc. etc. Right? Now, and second, and this is the most important role of the government actually, transaction costs are negligible. So now what are some of the transaction costs? One, information gathering, or some might call it symmetrical information. Right? Both parties must be negotiating, right, with the same amount of information. Okay? And so this information then cannot be too costly to obtain. Right? Because otherwise we'll have asymmetrical information. Right? Imagine if you're going to go buy a car, right, and you can't tell. Right? You can't tell if the car is a limit or not. Right? That will be unfair. Right? It's difficult to negotiate, right, on that front. Okay, and then the negotiation. So negotiation itself, right, can't be expensive. Right? You can't have a system where it involves a bunch of expensive lawyers to negotiate. Right? So the government should provide a platform for the interested party to negotiate. And finally, enforcement. This might be the most costly part, right? Because if I sign a contract with you and you backed out of that contract or you fail to honor it, what do I do? Right? Well, without the government involved, right, I have to supply my own private army and have to get my goons to come and claim what I believe is mine. Right? And that is very costly. Right? That is very expensive. Right? So that will hinder negotiation and transaction. So the government then provides the enforcement. So the government will be the ones to enforce these contracts. Okay. All right. So as long as these conditions, and this is what the actual Coase theorem says, right? As long as these conditions are satisfied, then the optimal outcome will result, and that's the 50 acres. Right? That's the 50 acres we're talking about here, right? Regardless of how you allocate the rights. But allocation of the rights still matter. Right? Okay. All right. Now let's take a review a bit. Right. Without without property rights allocation, or actually without trading, right? Without being able to trade property rights, this is the outcome, right? We have either zero, okay, social gain, or we have this a plus b but minus e and minus f. Right? And let's see if with negotiation, right, when people are allowed to trade, right, then can we get to the optimal outcome? So first, allocation, right? The city has all the rights.